Make sure that I think one of your sounds might be on. It just did that.
Yeah. Where is it? R? Okay.
I'd encourage you to sit over here.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Right, these are all staff members.
Yeah, we do have our
Panelists, yeah.
panelists are over there.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm delighted to start the new year with Popping the Science Bubble. This is a collaboration that Berkeley has been doing for a number of years. And we're excited for Science Bubble to come back. It's an important time for science. So I'm going to go ahead and read our land acknowledgement. Then I will introduce the program. And our organizers will introduce the speakers for tonight. All right. The Berkeley Public Library buildings are built on the territory of the Puchian within the homeland of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We acknowledge and honor the Ohlone people who have lived in Berkeley and throughout the East Bay since time immemorial. The library recognizes that Berkeley residents have and continue to benefit from the use and occupation of unseceded stolen land. And we pledge to recognize the permanence and the rich contributions that the Ohlone people continue to bring to the city of Berkeley and throughout the East Bay. We celebrate the strength of the Ohlone people and their culture. The Berkeley Public Library is committed to helping create a more just and anti-racist society and to furthering the visibility and celebration of Ohlone authors who are specific to the East Bay and Ohlone culture in our collections and programming. This is a living document that was co-written by Ohlone cultural leaders Vincent Medina and Louis Trevino and the Berkeley Public Library. All right, so welcome to Popping the Science Bubble. This is a monthly seminar series that aims to share new research findings from grad students and postdocs at UC Berkeley with the general public, and to create constructive discussion about a variety of science topics. We have two speakers at each seminar who will talk about their current research or a topic that they find really interesting. The organizers are two graduate students at UC Berkeley, Kaylin Swan and Daniel Brehauer. This program happens every third Tuesday of the month at 5:30 at the library and on Zoom. So if you're interested in checking out their past seminars, you can visit their website and their YouTube page, which has a lot of seminars. It's really good. You can also sign up for the listserv to join the mailing list to keep in the loop for upcoming seminars. And also feel free to check the library calendar and our Instagram for our seminar topics. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, and Happy New Year, everyone. We're very excited to have our first Popping Science seminar of 2025. Like Kelsey introduced, if you're interested in hearing more about all the upcoming seminars or check all the resources that we have in the past, please scan the QR code and you can subscribe to our newsletter. We only send 2 emails every month. With that, for tonight, we're very excited to have Jeremy and Kaihui as our speakers to present. And in terms of the talk, this is an open format talk, so we really encourage questions throughout the presentation. And for folks on Zoom, you can submit your questions either through the chat function or the Q&A section, and we'll ask them in real time. And we'll also have more time after each talk for questions as well. So with that, to start us off, tonight's first speaker is Jeremy Nicolai. Jeremy grew up in Baytown, Texas, near Houston. He attended UT Austin for his bachelor's degree. There he used chemistry to build complex molecules typically stitched together by nature. He then drove west to Berkeley, where he is completing his PhD in organometallic chemistry by developing new ways to build complex molecules that complement nature. When he's not in the lab, he tries to escape the smell of chemicals by hiking, enjoying nature, cooking, and playing with his cats. So yeah, it's my honor to introduce Jeremy, and let's get this set up and
Do you have any sound or videos?
No.
You're good. Okay.
All right, well, yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I'm really excited to tell you guys a little bit about what, some questions, there we go. I'll tell you about some questions that I've had, that kind of got me interested in science, and then chemistry, and then kind of, driven where I would like to go in my career. So kind of, I'm gonna ask 3 questions today. First will be about glue, second about vision, and the third about medicine. So the first question I want to ask today is, what is glue, right? We use it all the time. It's sticky, but what exactly is it, right? So if you take Elmer's glue, you take a look at what's actually inside of the bottle. You have essentially these polymers in solvent, in this case, water and propylene glycol. And these polymers are really, really, really long chains, or n in thousands. You have thousands of these units repeating over and over. And those obviously, they don't come from nature. They come from oil, right? I had a question.
Clearing my throat, thank you.
So basically how these polymers are made is you take a single component known as a monomer, in this case, vinyl acetate, to make polyvinyl acetate. And they use some kind of catalyst, and they usually heat it, and it basically stitches them together kind of in this stepwise manner here until you get 1,000-fold long chain. All right, so that's all well and good, right? But how does that make glue sticky? So Elmer's glue in particular has 2 components. So the first is the glue part with the polymer. And the second part is the other stuff, the solvent, right? And so in your, Elmer's glue, it's just a suspension of the polymer in the solvent. And say you put some Elmer's glue on a surface. That long chain of that polymer is surrounded by solvents. It doesn't really interact with much. But as you start to evaporate the solvent, as the glue dries, you start to be able to form interactions between the polymer chains and whatever you're trying to glue together. So what happens is once all the solvent is gone, it forms these really strong hydrogen bonding interactions that I've drawn in green dashes. And those are basically what are sticking things together. Very strong intermolecular forces, strong relatively. There's just a billion of them. And if you think about, that's how the glue sticks to itself. How does it stick to the thing you're putting it on? I put wood here as an example. So you take a look at the macro structure or the microstructure of wood. It has a lot of similar function groups to the polymers that we're using. So it's able to interact strongly. And that's actually why wood glue is some of the best glue. Fun fact. So we have Elmer's glue, but everyone's used other types of glue, mainly super glue, and it's different from Elmer. So in Elmer's, you have these preformed polymers. They're in water, and then it becomes sticky when the water's gone. Now, crazy glue is completely different, but it's a similar concept. So a crazy glue is it's the monomer for the polymer. So not the preformed polymers, but just the starting material, sealed in a container. Because as soon as you open it, it interacts with water in the air and spontaneously polymerizes to this polycyanoacrylate polymer, which kind of by the same-ish mechanism. So why is this one super and Elmer's glue it's not super? So if we take a look kind of the diagrammatic drawing, we have some bonds in between our chains. And if we take a look at the polymer chain that would form the crazy glue, we have these different functional groups. And these actually bind more strongly to each other and to the substrate for things you want to glue together than the polymers in Elmer's glue. That's why this is so much more difficult to get off. You'll often have to use some kind of solvent that will dissolve the polymer and remove it.
So may I ask a quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So with the crazy glue, does the relative humidity affect
Yes.
how effective it is?
Not how effective, but how fast it will
Okay.
dry or like become sticky. So if it's like very humid, it'll be slightly faster than if it was very dry. Just because it's pretty much just relying on water in the air.
And the Elmer's glue, if you're in a totally humid atmosphere,
That's
I
like a
mean,
long time.
is there any atmosphere where it would never dry and never adhere?
If you like enclose it, so none of the water could like diffuse away, I'm sure it would just stay a little color. Yeah, you could definitely rig the system to work or not work. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of like a question that I would be interested in when I was younger, and kind of the first question that I had that really drove me towards chemistry. It's kind of a silly question, I think. So why does looking at a bright light leave a dark spot illuminate it? And you can look at those and like close your eyes, you can still see it. Don't look at the sun, but it's a good prediction. So I want to talk about this because I think it's a perfect introduction to how chemistry and life are intertwined. So kind of what I've shown here are three common colored molecules. So we have three dyes. So on the left, we have a hair dye like you might find in trees. In the middle, we have Tyrian purple. The reason that purple is the color of royalty is you used to get Tyrian purple from snails. And it's absurdly expensive. Now, if you delete those BRs, you have indigo, which we use to dye your jeans. Then everyone's favorite banned or almost banned food additive, red 40. Also very red, a really good dye. So why are these good dyes? And some molecules are not good dyes. Why do these interact with light and other things don't? And it's because we have these long chains of alternating single and double bonds. This is what allows these molecules to interact with light. I'll explain a little bit, but I won't go too into this, obviously. But I want to emphasize that you have to have enough of these. So in these two molecules, even though they have alternating single and double bonds, they're both either clear or white, so they don't really interact with the light that hits it. But when you combine them, you make this elongated system of single and double bonds. You get solvent yellow number 7, another azo dye. I don't think it goes into food, so they're not going to ban it. But
Is azo?
Azo refers to this particular and yeah, there's a diameter group. So why does this happen? I think a good analogy would be you imagine like a really stiff spring, like a suspension spring and like a slinky. So these molecules that have very few alternating bonds are kind of like the suspension spring. They take a lot of energy to move. You have these very large gaps. What I've drawn here is energy levels. They're quantized, so they're discrete, but just know we want to be able to get to the next energy level with whatever amount of energy we put in, right? So say this molecule gets hit by white light. It has a few alternating bonds. The light puts some energy into the molecule because the light contains energy, but it doesn't quite get up to the next energy level. So it falls back down, no energy is absorbed, and white light comes back off. Just like a perfect rebound, nothing happened. But say we have many alternating single and double bonds, the energy gaps become smaller. We can talk about why later, but suffice it to say they do. So this time when you have your white light come in, deposit some energy, now we've been able to deposit energy in 1, 2, maybe 3 new energy levels. So we lost some energy. Now the light that comes out is color shifted in some way. So this is the key idea behind how we see everything, right? And so to kind of talk about how this goes into our actual vision, I wanted to take a quick step back and take a look at the eye. So in the back of the eye, we have the retina. The retina is full of optic nerves called cones and rods, which actually look like cones and rods. So the biologists did a good job naming them. They don't always do a good job, but sometimes they do. Inside those photoreceptive cells, the rods and the cones, there's this enzyme called rhodopsin. So this is kind of a representation of rhodopsin in the dark. And so in rhodopsin, there are these red bits, and that is this molecule here called cis-retinal. Cis referring to the geometric orientation, so cis being on the same or trans being opposite. And so what people have done is they've taken, this is basically a molecular picture where they take cis-retinal, the enzyme, they do a bunch of crazy stuff. They take a big X-ray diffractometer and they shoot particles at it. They measure the pattern and they can reconstruct how things are in 3D space. So here we can see cis-retinal tucked nicely into the enzyme, and it's actually connected to the enzyme over here. So that's what this structure is. Okay, so how does this have anything to do with how we see? So we start out with cis retinylidine in the dark. And basically what's happening is when it's in the dark, your ion channels in your cells are open, so it doesn't send a signal to your brain saying that there's light. Now, whenever this particular molecule is hit by visible light, it absorbs some. And when it absorbs some, what that does is it flips the geometry here from cis to trans. Which, okay, fine. But the key thing is that it changes the shape of the enzyme that it's in. So in green, this is the enzyme in the dark, and in brown, that's it in the light. And kind of what you can see is this portion has extended here. And what that does is it closes the ion channels, forcing the cell to send a signal to your brain that says, hey, I detected light. So this is the fundamental process of how we all see, which I think is just so cool. It's all just cis-trans isomerism and energy transfer. But okay, so right, we haven't gotten to the question I wanted to ask. We know how to see now. We know what causes vision. What about the dark spot, right? So we have this reaction that lets us see the light. But we have to somehow get back to the starting material, right? Because if we just use it all up, then we wouldn't be able to see anything because our vision would just be dark. So what happens is the body has this really long cascade, actually, multiple steps, multiple enzymes, lots of energy to just switch this double bond back to how it was. Because this is the favored product, this is disfavored, so it's energetically uphill, takes calories basically. And so the reason why you have a spot in your eye, because this is extremely fast. You know, we don't really have any lag in our vision. We've measured in picoseconds typically, but this whole regeneration process is very slow, so seconds. And a picosecond is like a billion times, or 1 times 10 to the 12 picoseconds per second. So that dark spot is the cis retinylidine that has been used up and slowly being regenerated by your body's machinery to allow you to see again. So don't stare at the sun. You can photo bleach the sun. But this, this brings me to a kind of a quick tangent, is that, people always say that if you eat carrots, your eyesight can get better. I was told that didn't work out. Neither here nor there. But the reason why is because carrots contain beta carotene. This is why they're orange, have these long single and double bonds. But when you eat carrots, your cellular machinery will basically chop this in half and turn it into retinal. So it doesn't help your vision a little bit over time. But yeah, so that's kind of the first question where I thought that, life and chemistry. Yes, sorry.
Okay, you can finish it.
No, go.
Okay.
Go.
Your talk about like different colors and things like that, it reminded me of something I learned about, I don't know, within the last year or two, about a kind of paint that's, it doesn't have pigment in it, but it's got
Oh,
color.
like Fanta Black, or the super dark pigments, or
It's not just dark, they were talking about that you could make color with this substance, but it's not quite the same as paint. And I don't know enough more
Yes.
about it, but I thought you might say, oh yeah,
Yes.
blah, blah, blah.
yeah, so you definitely can. So like what I showed here is like a molecular property, so property of individual molecules, but you can have a similar property with like larger structures. So for example, in nature, there's no molecule that when you look at it, it's blue. All of those are like larger structures that diffract the light in a certain way back to you. So I'm assuming that's probably what, like the super dark one.
Yeah, like the implication was, you won't have to paint the car. They'll make the car have the color.
Yeah, out of that.
And
That'd be a
that's
great
just because
application, yeah.
It's reflecting that part of the spectrum back and blocking.
Yeah, kind of. It's like, so it has like tiny little facets, basically. The light like bounces around and only certain colors escape due to whatever reason. That's about the depth.
Angle,
Yeah, it's has to do with,
like reflecting on.
yeah, and like, like polarized sunglasses. I think there's polarization to it, that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can definitely make colors without pigment, but we usually just it's way easier. And I guess the last question I wanted to kind of talk about is, if I have a headache and I take some medicine, how does the medicine know that I have a headache? Why does my headache go away unless maybe it's not like my arms feel slightly better? So there are a few kind of widely known pharmaceuticals for pain, the two most common being Tylenol, which is number one, and Advil, which is number two, in terms of consumption in the world. We don't really understand Tylenol very well. I had a boss once tell me that Tylenol would not be approved by the FDA today, so do with that what you will, but Advil's good, and we understand how it works, so I'll talk about Advil today. So I guess the first question, as always, is how do we make Advil in the first place? It's got to come from somewhere. Nature doesn't make it. Nature kind of makes it, but it's beside the point. So basically what we do is we drill oil, like usual for everything. We drill some oil and we get this tar compound out on the left. And then on massive scales, we run a few quick reactions, acylation, reduction, carbonylation. And I thought I'd show a picture of the plant that manufactures ibuprofen. So this is Bayer's ibuprofen plant in Texas. This thing operates 24/7, 365. It doesn't stop, and there's almost no human intervention. So once you're doing things on 20,000 tons per year scale, you don't want to ever have to stop it. It's a nightmare to research. But a huge market, so a massive drug that's super important. But how does it work as a painkiller? So say you fell and scraped your arm, now your arm hurts, you have some tissue damage. What happens is there's an enzyme called phospholipase A2. All the details are beyond my scope of expertise, but suffice it to say, eventually it releases this compound known as arachidonic acid. And there's also these two enzymes called COX-1 and COX-2 floating around systemically throughout your entire body. But whenever COX-1 or COX-2 happens to run into one of these acid molecules, it catalyzes this transformation into a prostaglandin. And prostaglandins are bioactive, they're hormone-like, and they control your fever regulation, your pain perception, vasodilation, and stomach acidity, among other things. There are many ways the body does this, but this is one of the main ones. So, all right, so what is Tylenol doing? Right. So say we take some Tylenol.
Advil.
Yeah, sorry. You're right. Say I take some Advil.
Remember to. Tylenol.
Yeah, no more Tylenol. What happens is it finds this enzyme and it slides into kind of a pocket that's formed in the structure. And so this is kind of another molecular picture. Here we have the COX-2 enzyme, just different amino acids sticking in. And here's the Advil sitting right there in this pocket. Okay, so that's cool. Why does that do anything? Okay, so if we block this pocket, it can't produce prostaglandins, right? So why does it work? So we take a look at these two molecules, the acid being the native substrate that the enzyme was designed to do reactions on, and the one on the right being our Advil. You can see they have the same kind of functional group. So basically what happens is instead of this acid binding weakly in this pocket, Advil binds very, very strongly in here. So instead of being catalyzed into a prostaglandin, it just keeps floating around. Eventually the body clears it through metabolism of some sort. If there's no prostaglandins, you're not going to perceive pain. So that's how Advil works as a painkiller. But back to the original question, does Advil know where the pain is? So let's say we have a cut. There's these enzymes all over our entire body, but it just so happens that near the cut, they're active. And in fact, 98% of the Advil you take is not doing what you want it to do. It's binding to something else, doing other things. So the answer is no. It has no idea where the pain is. This is actually why you get side effects, because most of it's doing something else. But I think what is, that might be a little bit depressing, but what I think is amazing is that less than 2% of what you take is giving you 100% of your pain killing ability, which I think is amazing. So I guess obviously the next question is, can we turn medicines into heat-seeking missiles of some sort? So Advil is a small molecule therapeutic. They all kind of act in the same way. They are systematic, and then they find an enzyme and they stop from doing something. You can also, these are some new things that have become very popular, to use antibody drug conjugates. So you'll train an antibody to, for example, recognize a certain cancer cell, and then you take a small molecule, you stick it on the antibody binds on the cancer cell and delivers a small molecule. So that is that one does know where your target is. You can also use these things called PROTACs. I think the first one was approved last year. But basically what it does is it has two binding regions. It binds two different proteins, and one of them is always the same, and it's the protein that tags things for destruction by cell. And then finally, you can also do gene editing with like CRISPR. There are a couple of gene editing therapies out there, like I think over $2 million per dose. So that's great. See how that goes. Exactly. Yeah, United's not covering that. But I also wanted to just kind of show what some other medicines look like, from a molecular perspective.
Question about the Advil
Yeah.
kind of, are there over-the-counter pigments that, not opioids that, are not petroleum based?
No.
No.
Everything starts from oil, like everything. Everything, seriously, it's kind of sad. So
Including aspirin?
including aspirin, you can get it from trees, but it's much more expensive, and like the yield is much lower in terms of like your mass and that kind of thing. That is one main area of chemistry research today, is kind of taking the chemistry we developed in like the 70s, where we didn't really care about the environment, and or actually but some people, and trying to invent new ways that take less energy or don't have to start from oil, or that kind of thing. That's a huge area, and a lot of the new drugs that come out, they use those ideas, and they're much more environmentally friendly. But a lot of the old ones are just like straight up tar with some random reactions, bunch of CO2 release, all that good stuff.
Even Tylenol?
Even Tylenol. I think there are a few new routes that are more green, but I think you still start from tar.
Is there any way to tell by looking for me, nothing about chemistry, to read a package and have some idea where those ingredients came from? I could do that.
I think it depends. So they'll like, I would say
I
probably
mean, I'm not
not.
that obsessive, just.
Yeah, I would say probably not. Because the companies that make these drugs, they keep everything, very close to the chest, right? If somebody else figures out how to make it, they can make it and break your patent and steal your drug, right? Exactly, yeah, you totally could. There you go. But I just want to show a couple other drugs. So Lipitor for cholesterol, Vyvanse if you have ADHD, Paxlovid, so you get COVID, this is what you take. Jardiance, I believe it's for diabetes, and then the super hot one, Ozempic. It's this massive molecule. I couldn't fit it all, so all those letters are a lot of molecules. So yeah, coming to the end, I wanted to relate this quickly back to my research, which I won't really talk about. I'll just kind of show some graphics, but I really became interested in research. I wanted to ask questions, and I wanted to answer them. So kind of questions that I try to answer are, can we make pharmaceutical drugs better? Can we make more complex molecules more easily? And like we were talking about earlier, can we do reactions we already know how to do to make products that we need in a more environmentally friendly way? And for instance, one way being enzymes. If you just take nature, make it do your chemistry, it's way more green than doing it from oil. But I thought I would end with just a few books that I really enjoy. Anything from Deborah Blum, she's a great writer, as well as science communicator. Anything from Theater Grade, the pictures are amazing. And then, of course, Silent Spring. I think that's amazing. And then Napoleon Buttons is fun because you learn that tin has different forms depending on the temperature. So when they're in Russia, it probably crumbled and they couldn't close their coats. So fun stuff you learn. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any additional questions. And if you have any think of anything, you email me until Berkeley deletes my email when I graduate in like a year. So yeah, happy to take any questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for putting books on there. That is excellent.
Available as
That's
EPS.
librarian approved.
I
I've
have a question.
Yes.
So, earlier, we were talking about the eye and, seeing the spots is related to the regeneration of the molecules that you talked about.
Mhm.
So like, are those spots, is this process also why like when you get dizzy and when you start and that, also because the body slows down, like, something else, you don't get as much of or as fast of a regeneration, or is that something?
That's a great question. I think that's something different. I don't know exactly why you see stars. I do know the balance is related to the inner ear though. So I don't think that it would be exactly related to this process. But there's more than like, there are a lot of things, because like this is just what starts it, then there's a whole like signaling cascade of like a bunch of enzymes and stuff. It could be doing something with something over there, but I don't think it'd be doing anything to this particular cycle.
Is there much science going on? I would assume using nature, like using herbal remedies. To create like the kind of mimicking nature.
Mhm.
Can you just talk a little bit about it? What's different to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to your point, there are a lot of drugs that are out there right now that are based on traditional Chinese medicine. So like a lot of these like herbal remedies, they have some compound that's active in them. A lot of people, like original practitioners didn't know exactly what it was. Um, Now pharmaceutical companies will like take them, try to find out exactly what it is that's causing the effect, and then they will, do chemistry on that to make new stuff. Like for example,
Right?
exactly, yeah, and then you're like,
Naturally.
great. And so one example is quinine, fights malaria, comes from the cinchona tree, cinchona alpha. So for a long time, that was the only way that you could get quinine, is you would grow these trees and you would process them and extract the stuff and add it to your drink or whatever, or your medicine. So there's quite a lot of that. I would say that the starting point for most drugs is nature.
So can you say that about Tylenol or?
I believe, I think that, I believe that Advil is, at least what we take now, is very similar to, compound that was in the sap of a tree. It looked fairly similar and it was known to have like analgesic properties. So someone just decided to take it, analyze it, figure out exactly what it was, and then make it on giant scale.
Was it used by people before?
Yes.
By movement?
Yeah, it was, I don't remember exactly where in the world, but yeah, by the native population, yeah, definitely. So a lot of, like, traditional Chinese medicine treatments, they have substance, right?
Yeah.
If you can just isolate that one thing, but sometimes, I think there's an obsession with having one molecule. Sometimes I think it's multiple molecules working in tandem. And I think that pharmaceuticals as a whole doesn't really know how to tackle that. So, but yeah, most therapies I would say start from nature.
Like the idea that only 2% of the ibuprofen that's working on the pain part, the rest of it's running around through your body and making other things happen.
Yep.
Who's motivated to make that better? Is anyone trying to make that better?
Yes, so there's an entire field on this, pharmacokinetics. I won't, just about how the timing of the drug being metabolized by your body. Obviously, ideally it would be like 100% hits what you want, because then you could add 1/100th of the amount for your dosage, right? So that'd be a massive cost saver for everyone.
So
This,
they would charge the same amount.
it would charge, exactly, yeah, it's hard to say enough. The profit margins would be massive.
Manufacturer.
This is kind of a problem with the biology. So like the acid part that I showed in red that binds in that enzyme, things that bind acids are present all over the body, weakly or strongly. And it's very, very hard to make one molecule that will only interact with one very specific thing, nothing else. So yeah, the idea is to make this 100% or make this 0 at 100, but it's very, very difficult. No.
I was gonna ask, it was like injectable work better, but then I'm also the tablet.
Yeah, so yeah, if you You can take Advil because it survives stomach acid. If you have something that doesn't survive stomach acid, then that's basically, that's basically it. That's kind of how it goes in the industry too. They're like, oh, we want to make a pill. And they're like, oh, it doesn't survive the acid. I guess we gotta do an injection.
Well, they used to say DMSO will take it straight through the skin to the. exact
That's true.
spot.
But DMSO is pretty toxic.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, DMSO, sorry, it's dimethyl sulfoxide, so it's uh basically like a triangle shaped molecule that binds to fat very well. So that's why it goes straight through your skin. It binds,
This is the, right
Yeah.
there.
yeah, goes right through. And that's like kind of the idea for like transdermal patches. Yeah, like the only example I can think of is, nicotine patches, but
So do they use a fat as a carrier then to to introduce whatever the other?
yeah, so typically, yeah, so
That's
typically.
called crushed aspirin.
Well, typically what they'll do is they'll make like a water soluble polymer, kind of like the ones for the glue. And they will attach the whatever molecule it is to that. And then those you can like spray onto flat surfaces. And then you put those on your skin, the polymers will slowly release the molecule and it'll go into your skin. So they get very creative when they're figuring out how to deliver these molecules and these drugs, because that's once you have something that works, and then an entirely different challenge is making sure the body doesn't destroy it before it gets there. So you got to take a pill more often, it's worse it not being destroyed, and less often it's better. Any other questions?
Let's give another round of applause. Now we're kind of introducing our second speaker while we're swapping over laptops. Our second speaker is going to Kaihui someone. And so he grew up in China during a time when fossil fuels were driving rapid economic growth, which inspired her to pursue her career in environmental science. Over time, she developed deep interest in climate change, particularly how international trade complicates and magnifies the challenges of addressing it. Recognizing the critical role that cities and local governments play in climate mitigation, she earned her PhD in geographical sciences, where she focused on developing models and data sets to quantify emissions, including those embedded in supply chains. However, she quickly realized that addressing climate change requires much more than research. It demands strong government leadership and active community engagement. Call your congressional representatives. This led her to work with local governments, creating climate planning tools designed to make a tangible, real-world impact. Her goal has always been to bridge the gap between science and action, empowering communities to take meaningful steps towards a sustainable future. Outside of professional work, she enjoys hiking, dancing, and experimenting with new recipes in the kitchen. Now, please take it away.
Thank you for the nice. Oh, I don't think your screen was being shared. That's true. Oh, from Zoom. Yeah. But I'm gonna-
We can see your notes.
Um,
Or desktop one?
Oh, I think it's because it's, this is like a narrow setting, so. Maybe I could do. How does it work?
You want that hit, screen mirroring, you go to settings.
Okay.
And then search screen mirroring in the search bar. Screen mirroring, search bar. Or maybe, or displays as well. Yeah. Mirror. You can do, so use as, and then click on that, and then stop mirroring.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So this.
Yep, that works. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining me today, to talk about an issue that affects everyone, all of us, climate change. So it's a topic that is in the headline in our conversation and most important in the future. So, when we talk about tackling climate change, we often picture the national governments making the sweeping policies, but there's a truth. Cities and the regional efforts they are the front lines. It's often the cities that, like the one we live in, that are doing the heavy lifting to combat climate change and push the efforts of the low carbon transition together. So today I want to focus on unique and inspiring aspects of this challenge, how our cities and communities hold the keys to building a green and sustainable low carbon future together. So we know that climate change has led to some disastrous consequences on humans, such as the heat waves, wildfires, droughts, sea level rises, and some other extreme weather conditions, we can name it. The primary driver of climate change is the increase in the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, mainly the carbon dioxide emissions from human activities such as burning the fossil fuels. And these gases would trap the heat from the sun like a blanket, making our Earth warmer. So looking at the carbon dioxide emissions over the past 800,000 years, even though there are fluctuations periodically in the history, there's no time like now when the emissions is this high. As we can see from the screen, the very recent years. And as a result, the temperature on the Earth is increasing. So the consensus in the scientific communities is that if we limit the global temperature increase within 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial level, we can avoid or reduce some of the disastrous consequences and some of the irreversible changes that I showed from the picture. So we need some urgent actions. And there is a projection of how much emission reductions are under different policy scenarios until 2050. So following the current policies, as shown here, will lead to the temperature increase to almost 3 degrees in 2050. So if we fulfill every country's climate pledges, we will reach about 2.2 degree increase. So this is still not enough for us to achieve the 1.5 degree goal. And there's still a gap between what the countries have pledged to reduce emissions with the actual actions that we needed to achieve this 1.5 degree goal, the goal that can minimize the disastrous consequences. And closing this gap would require the efforts not only from the national governments, but also the subnational governments like the cities, regions, organizations, institutions, households, and individuals. So why cities matter? Globally, over half of the population live in the urban areas, and in the United States, about 80% of the population in the urban areas. Cities consume 3/4 of the energies in the world and generates over 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So the way we build, move, and consume our city directly affect our planning and our life. So cities also have the power and opportunities to, for example, innovate and lead where the national governments might struggle. For example, developing some of the climate policies that are tailored to the local needs and pay more attention to the local communities that are more likely to be affected by different policy changes, and some of the communities that are in the, like, vulnerable to the climate change. And these efforts can go above and beyond the national policies and fulfill the national pledges should the national policy become inadequate. So it is exciting that a lot of cities in the region participating in the climate commitments just in the past decade. More than 300 regions and over 14,000 cities around the world announced their climate commitments. Since 2014, there's an initiative called Non-State Actor Zone for Climate Change, led by the cities and regions and also some of the organizations. And cities and the regions, their important role in the climate change started to be recognized in 2015, the Paris Agreement. But how can we measure and evaluate their ambition and progress? This is a question very important. So first, we may want to know what targets they have set in their cities and how much emissions they aim to reduce and by what time. So what I did is to build a database of all climate targets from the cities and the regions around the world, and mainly I focus on the 20 largest economies, I call it G20 countries. And we identified over 3,000 cities and 170 regions that have quantifiable targets. It's like they have, this quantifiable targets means they have very specific numbers about their baseline year and how much emissions they're going to reduce by what percent and by which year. And with this information, it's very important for us to track their progress. And so we can evaluate their progress as well. So together, these cities and the regions represent over 2 billion people around the world. And that's a quarter of the total population on the planet. So from this map, you'll see like cities in the regions in Japan, Canada, Australia, and the UK. Their climate targets cover more than 80% of their populations. But in some of the developing countries, like Argentina and Indonesia, their climate pledges only cover about less than 20% of the national population. And this climate,
Sorry, could you say the gray areas on your map, is that because there's no data or because?
oh, so this area is because, so this is part of the G20 countries, but they have no data so far available being made for climate commitments, and these are quantifiable targets. Thanks for the question. And well, these climate commitments have been accumulating over the past decade. So it's interesting to look at where they are coming from. So to look at who is increasing their ambitions. And here's a plot showing the number of targets over time. And developing countries like Brazil and India are proposing more quantifiable climate targets. And led by the California Climate Action, cities and regions in the United States are raising pledges in the recent years as well, especially after the first round of withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. And the most right side panel is Europe, and you probably notice there's a drop of the targets over time. That is because some of the targets were made expire at the year of 2020, and they are developing new targets beyond their previous targets. And this data allow me to quantify the aggregated emission cities and the regions and to reduce. So when we think about which city and how much each city and individual can reduce, can contribute to climate change, we tend to get lost. But here together, they're substantial, as in this figure. So all the cities I studied, about 3,000 cities and over like 170 regions. they together, these ambitions, account for roughly 10 gigaton carbon dioxide emissions. This number is about like 30% of the total global emissions. And these cities and the regions together, they aim to reduce about 90% of the emissions by 2060. And as you can see, some of the countries like China, the United States, Japan, and the EU are the top 4 pledged for emission reduction. Of course, there are also the big emitters. And many cities and regions even made more ambitious targets that you may have heard from some of the news, like net zero targets. And this means they pledge not to add additional emissions to the atmosphere, which means cities can have emissions, but as long as the emissions can be counterbalanced, for example, these carbon dioxide being absorbed by the urban forests, and they may have some carbon removal technologies to offset this carbon dioxide emissions. So we found that more than 570 cities and regions around the world, mainly G20 countries, developed their net zero targets, and most of them targeting 2050. And over 3/4 are from cities, and the rest are from regions. A large proportion of the net zero targets actually coming from the developing countries. As you can see from the right side figure, a lot of them are from the South Asia and the Latin American countries. But here's a challenge. We found that for cities with the net zero targets, it's a very ambitious target, it's good. But just under half also have their interim reduction target. So, which is a very important indicator for us to track their progress, to make sure that their progress is credible, ensure the credibility and the robustness of their progress. So, a step-by-step plan is always good for achieving a goal, especially an ambitious goal. That's very helpful. For example, studying over the semester is always better than cramming over the exam. So there are a big challenge that cities may want to address in the near future. So with cities and the regions, with their climate actions, how close are we to achieve the 1.5-degree goal? And what's the progress from all these cities and the regions that we studied, about 300 cities, 170 regions. So we learned that promisingly that cities are making ambitious targets. Over 500 cities have more ambitious targets than their regional counterparts by 2030. And these cities aim to reduce their emission by additional 40% compared to their regional average by 2030. But here's the challenge. While many cities are setting ambitious goals, like reaching net zero emissions by 2050, a lot of the fewer than 40 of the cities are on track to meet their targets. And only a fraction are aligned with the global goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. So my finding also shows some numbers as highlighted in the figure that cities and regions reduce their emissions by an average of 1.6% per year. But to meet their proposed targets, they need to double the efforts to reduce their emission about 3% every year. To achieve the 1.5-degree goal, they need to do even more. They have to reduce their emission at an average pace of 4% per year to achieve this ambitious goal, 1.5 degree, to minimize some of the disastrous consequences.
You know, it's very early to answer this question, but since the US has now been withdrawn from the Paris Accord, do you know how that will affect the city's goals? Cities that have really ambitious goals, were they dependent on the federal government
to support those efforts, or are they really separate? And do you think they'll be able to go on and maybe be somewhat successful?
Yeah, that's a very important question we need to consider. Well, I would say a lot of the cities, they have the power to do a lot of things within the city. And of course, some of the emissions, for example, from the power grid, that is more tied to the like original grid, so it's probably out of the control of the city. But they also have the choice, for example, in California, like CCA, you can choose different like the utility companies, and different utility companies source their energy from different energy sources. For example, some companies may have higher proportion of renewable energy than some other companies. So if you know about the company, if you want to choose some low carbon emissions, you can still do that. But for cities, a lot of the policies like public transportation, cities have the power to do something. It's also important for the
That requires a lot of federal dollars.
yeah, that is, yeah, a lot of money, but, right now, a lot of the local governments, also the philanthropies can also shift some of the financial subsidies to some of the cities as well. A lot of the donors may not want to shift their, like, climate subsidies and finance to support some of the actions that are really happening than some other fields. So cities can still do a lot of things, especially if I can tailor to the local needs. But of course, there are some limitations. So after learning about their city's ambition and progress, so what is holding us back? We know that smaller cities and some developing, especially the cities in some developing regions, they usually have very limited resources capacity, as you said. There are often like some financial, technical, and human resources needed to implement some of the ambitious climate plans. And many cities rely on some external entities like utilities and some higher level of government to address some of the emission reduction, especially those that are out of their control, outside of their jurisdictions. Some other factors like a data and accountability issue. So usually when the data is available, it's often outdated, and there's an average lag about 3 to 5 years for emission inventories to be developed and reported so that we can know what emissions are being generated by this year. And it's also one of the limitations of our study that we use a self-reported data, which can have some timeline. So we may not know some of the latest progress that cities made in the recent years. And over 60% of the cities in the region, actually they did not keep the pace to report their emission data, and making it very difficult for us to evaluate their progress. So as a result, there's a gap between the ambition and implementation. So many entities set long-term targets, like measure targets by 2050, but lack concrete and actionable near-term actions to ensure the progress. And local governments often prioritize some of the policies that can bring co-benefits, like taking public transportation. They may want to consider some of the low-income communities, and these policies with the mitigation, with the emission reduction, but also comes with the co-benefits are some of the policies most cities would more likely to take. But there are more ambitious climate policy strategies they may not be able to take up. And institutional challenges and the political and economic shifts also delay the implementation. So what can we do? This is often the question that many people ask. So I would say we could support the local leaders in a way to advocate for the climate-friendly policies in our city, whether it's better public transit, green space, or energy efficient programs. Your voice matters, and we can hold our leaders accountable by, for example, cities need to be transparent about their emission, about their climate progress, and then we have the power to demand those actions. We could choose more sustainable lifestyles, using less energy at home, and support some of the local business with the low carbon emissions, and prioritize options with the energy saving appliances as well, and taking public transportation, reducing waste. There are all the actions we can take. We can also spread the word. Tell your family, friends, and neighbors about the importance of the local climate action, and share those successful stories that cities and communities have done. And every voice matters when it comes to the climate friendly policy making. Here, I'm gonna have a few examples about some of the cities making bold climate actions and actually achieving significant progress. For example, Boston is making plans to increase their public transit, especially after post-COVID recovery. They develop some programs that encourage the citizens to take on public transportation after COVID, and develop some of the programs, especially for the communities that hit hardest after the COVID pandemic. And they develop some fare free program to make the public transportation more affordable, so that citizens don't have to pay to get on public transportation. Shenzhen is a city in China that started the emission trading scheme design and implementation. It's more like emission trading, so that the different companies, enterprises can feel more motivated to reduce their emissions. Copenhagen is another city that encourages bicycle and walk lanes and public transit as well. And over 70% of the trips being made in Copenhagen was actually by the public transit and the walk and bicycles. Morvan is another city making great progress to adopt renewable energy and developing more urban farming. So to summarize this presentation, cities and the regions are very important in climate actions. Their pledges are very important to mitigate some of the disastrous consequences caused by the climate change, and they are making progress, but many are not on track to their targets and insufficient to align with the 1.5-degree goal. And less than half of the cities in the regions provided sufficient data to track their progress. And for those we can evaluate, less than half are on track to their targets, and even fewer are aligned with the 1.5-degree goal. So we see the challenge, but there are a lot of opportunities we can do to move towards low carbon and sustainable future. So this study that I present here is published on academic journal. It's also a result of the 2 reports. If you're interested in reading more about the climate change study from cities and the regions and the companies, here are the 2 reports released last year. I launched the report at the COP conference in Dubai, and I joined a panelist talking about the transparency, credibility of the climate actions when I was working at Data Driven Lab. And I want to thank the organizing committee for organizing this event and the Berkeley Library to make that happen. And thank you for attending this talk.
Was
So,
that you in the photo?
yes.
Okay, didn't quite see that.
Yeah. Thank you, that one. So, well, when I asked AI to show me what the future city would look like, this is what they gave me. Lots of drones, wind turbines, solar panels, and bike lanes. And we know that now we have the knowledge and the tools to build a sustainable and equitable future. Now it's just a time to act and make a real difference for the generation to come. Here's some link about this is I currently work in the lab called REAL, led by Professor Cameron. This is a link if you are interested in checking some of the latest research about renewable energy and climate inequality. And also my own website if you are interested in contacting me. Here's the email as well. Thank you.
Thank you. What does RAIL stand for?
It's renewable and appropriate energy lab.
And for somebody like me who is not a researcher, where would I go to find out about cities' goals, what their targets are and whether they're meeting them? Like say Berkeley as an example. So I live in Berkeley. Where would I go to find out about Berkeley's plans and proposals?
Yeah. So for Berkeley, so there's usually some information on the
city's
document.
website or
Yes, our city's website, if you're interested in Berkeley and check about the climate action plans for the city of Berkeley, they have this document available on their city website. If you're interested in some other cities, there's a portal.
and regional plans and
Yeah, there's a portal called Global Climate Action portal, and there's a website that this is also the pictures that I showed earlier that is from that portal. This one. So you can,
okay.
it's an interactive, it's called GCAP, Global Climate Action Portal. You can click on each and look at their climate actions and plans.
This is very informative. Thank you for a great talk. I have a question about, I think earlier slides when you showed the G20 map. Yeah, that one. And you were saying how these are quantifiable goals that they set. Can you give some examples of what the quantifiable goals are besides, or is it mostly like how many tons of CO2 they're releasing or emitting, and or are there other goals that they're measuring by?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very important question. So from this figure, it's more like they're reporting, some of the cities and the regions reporting, okay, we're gonna make some climate commitments and report to this portal. That's why it yields a lot of cities and regions. But a lot of the climate commitments are not very well developed. They're not concrete. We don't know actually how much emission they're gonna reduce and by which year. So the quantifiable climate target is mainly the targets that I can find the information about. There's a baseline year, so they want to reduce emission compared to which year. And for that year, how much emission they generated. And what percentage of the emission they pledge to reduce, like they're gonna reduce 60%, 50%. If you don't have this information, like how would we know that how much you're gonna do? So how much what percentage of emission are gonna be reduced compared to which year and by what time, for example, by 2050 or by 2030. So there are some of the very important information we would need to evaluate their progress.
So is it with a specific
like division, like which public transit, we're going to, our goal is to reduce the emission by 20%, or is it the overall emission of the city?
Oh, yeah, right now it's because it's a very large scale study, and in this study, it's mainly the overall emissions. But for cities, they also develop very detailed climate action plan. So if you just search climate action plan, then it will show up some of the PDF documents that they develop more details about in which sector they plan to do something, for example, in transportation sector, in the building sector, and in waste reduction. So they have very detailed sectoral actions they're going to take to achieve this goal.
Let's do one more round of applause for both of our speakers.
Thank you. You guys help share this good?
Yes. So thank you so much for both of our speakers, for these wonderful talks tonight. And if you enjoyed hearing these talks, then they're gonna be up on YouTube in a week-ish time scale or so. And if you wouldn't mind getting those links and QR codes and whatnot up. We'll show you the link to our website very shortly, and then there's the QR code that you can use to very easily sign up to our listserv, where you can get even more Pop in the Science Follow-on news if you want to stop by. So our next seminar is going to be on, I believe it's February 18th, once again, third Tuesday of the month. And our speakers, I think, just confirmed. I remember one of them was talking about the impacts of radiation in the Navajo Nation. I admit I forget what the other one is, but stop on by for some very exciting topics. One more time, thanks to all of you for stopping by, and as promised, all of our social media.
Thank you. Thank you.